Hey everyone, Mr. Happy here, and in this video we're going to be going over an interview that Yoshi-P did with Japanese media site Gamer. Just talks about a few things, 6.1, Ultimate, PvP, and, while I am in the Final Fantasy 16 craze right now, I figured I'd cover the other thing that Yoshi-P talks about on occasion, Final Fantasy 14. I'll include a link to the source in the description, specifically the source of this translation, which has been provided by MKillerB over on Reddit, with a general synopsis of each point. It also has a link to the original full Japanese interview, so be sure to check out both those sources, give them clicks, likes, whatever, engage with them directly since I'm just using their content. Anyway, the first point that MKillerB has written out here involves the implementation of duty support in 6.1. Yoshi-P acknowledges that a lot of new players are picking up the game, especially in Japan. Yeah, the game is actually far more popular overseas than it is in Japan. Of course, the rest of the world outside of Japan, pretty big place, but Japan itself's player base is usually a little bit more reserved. So he's glad to see that it actually is growing in Japan and believes there is room for growth in the Japanese market. He's been getting tons of feedback on new players, specifically saying it's been a lot easier for them to try out the game finally, thanks to the duty support system. Now then he goes on to talk about the main scenario in patch 6.1, and he wanted all of the dialogue to be a little bit more upbeat and positive, even in situations where it may not have seemed to be like it should be the case, and the darker tones that actually take place in some of those settings. But he wanted things, reunions with characters like Y'shtola to have a positive vibe to them, keeping with setting out on a new adventure. And I felt like they achieved that largely. He also comments on Estinian being smarter than he was when we actually were interacting with him in Endwalker's base story. You'd think, oh, he's going to get scammed here, and then he doesn't. He's actually knowledgeable about the entire thing. They also mentioned the return of Nabdeen, who we have not seen in, well, it's only been a few months. Doggo, I'm trying to record a late video. Sorry if you can hear the neighbor's dog right now. Now, Yoshida also comments on that Y'shtola scene, specifically referring to the 6.1 scene, as he puts it, magical girl phase, and I'm sure many of you can figure it out from there. He's aware of how the community jokes around about her, but he really doesn't want to push characters too far outside of, well, who they are, and that they probably wouldn't go much further than something like this. This is a breaking point, and they shouldn't go further than what they have done with her. So, in other words, if they're going to be doing these kind of offbeat things with characters that are kind of out of the blue and unexpected, this is probably the limit of what you would ever see. Now, speaking of which, on Treasure Hunt Dungeons, he hints that the dialogue about Urianger J and the Loporrits is tied to future updates. For those who don't know, the Treasure Hunt maps basically are Loporrit, Loporrit dungeons more so than anything else. And so some of the dialogue there is actually seemingly tying into treasure dungeon updates we'll be having across the rest of the expansion. The next update will be in line with what's come before, which tells us that we are going to be getting a roulette wheel equivalent for Treasure Hunt Dungeons. But in the longer term, he's thinking about adding more different types of gameplay to treasure hunts. I've always wanted a Plinko machine personally, but it's good to see that they don't just want to kind of sit on their laurels with Treasure Hunt. Yes, it is a largely successful format that they have achieved with treasure hunts over the expansions, but something new is always great, and I think people who do treasure hunts regularly, myself included, will be appreciative to the updates that they may be considering in the future. Now, they also ask about 6.1, Golbez, the 4 Arc Fiends, and Yoshi-P says, listen, Endwalker's base story wasn't as Final Fantasy IV as people expected, I think, so we're going to be trying to pay off people's expectations in that regard. So in other words, be excited if you're a Final Fantasy IV fan. The Golbez and 4 Arc Fiends are likely going to be quite a fun time. Now, this is one of my favorite things. Really little point. Aglaia. Apparently, the writer for Aglaia is a junior writer who was previously writing for the Beast Tribe quests in Shadowbringers. They asked this person to step up and do the scenario for the Alliance raid. Now, it says Ishikawa and Yoshida made various outlines, and then that was weaved in with the junior writer's ideas, but that is great to see them fostering that kind of talent. And I gotta say, the Shadowbringers Beast Tribes were very well done. Aglaia, for me, on a whole nother level with how it's being done currently. So I'd love to hear more about that interaction, maybe in a live letter in the future, but good to see even more junior talent being brought up, and I'm sure that guy feels great about what he's accomplished and the reception to it. Now, it's implied that the 12 could look different than their in-game depictions. This is indeed told to us in the Aglaia storyline. They could have different genders altogether. So in other words, don't be surprised if you think you know what a member of the 12 might look like, but then they end up just being completely different. I think they've set that expectation in-game well enough. Also, he didn't think Naldal would be as popular as Azima, and I think that's just because Yoshi-P knows the internet and his own community maybe a little too well on that point. But Naldal really is a cinematic and musical masterpiece. I think that really adds a lot. If Azima had their own phase, their own theme, and was maybe the final boss and was more cinematic, I think it wouldn't be that way. But what they've done is brilliant, and Naldal is one of the, in my opinion, one of the best 24-man bosses in terms of the whole package that we've ever had. So I'm not really surprised, but he's just really happy to see how much people are enjoying the 12. Speaks briefly that the scales mechanic used to be even harder, but they tuned it to where it is now. Now, moving on to PvP, talks kind of just about the stage of planning for Crystalline Conflict. The planning stage took about a year. The team in charge of PvP don't just work on PvP, but all sorts of other battle content and job design. That, to me, explains a lot about how PvP ended up the way that it did. And I hope that's not something they plan on continuing in the future, because PvP really does need a dedicated team, in my opinion. They can't just be picking up pieces here and there, because I feel like that's just sloppy. So I hope that's not still the plan going forward, even if that was the plan during the planning stages. The first decision was in the planning stages to get rid of role binding. So, you know, like how we can basically be, it's just one of each job and the roles themselves don't really matter much. The starting point was to give each job self-heals to make their skill job specific, their skills job specific rather than role specific. Yeah, they achieved that. We've seen that in Decision. After the initial, oh man, this one, I got asked about this a bunch on stream today. After this initial plan, there were various ideas such as Blue Mage only PvP. I have said this before. I have brought up a Blue Mage PvP. I've also brought up things like Blue Mage Deep Dungeon. I've been screaming about Blue Mage specific content. If they really want that job to be more popular than it is, or to really push the idea of limited job and having specific content for it to its idea, the Mass Carnival, cool, but you can do more. And this made me think, okay, I think they know they can do more. The idea was for it to be a battle royale style game with a large arena. In a gradually narrowing arena, instead of picking up weapons, you'd use Blue Mage's learning ability and fight with the abilities you learn. So it sounds like they would be putting PvE enemies and forcing you to learn in the middle of it. I think probably it would be best if you could just pick up abilities on top of maybe being able to go out of your way to learn things. Maybe also learning skills from the Blue Mages that you actually beat. I think that would be a nice way of kind of accelerating the match, because we know they're trying to get away from those super long things. But they don't say anything that this idea won't happen. In fact, the very next point is that for the main non-Blue Mage PvP mode, wait a minute. So what do you mean? So you mean you took that idea and you've now archived it, and now you need like the real PvP ideas? That makes it sound like it's a much more feasible thing to happen than I would have anticipated. I want more basic modes for regular PvP. I want my capture the flags. I want WoW players. I want my Warsong Gulch. I want my Arathi Basin. I want the basics. So as cool as this may be, I probably wouldn't be as into it personally, but I bet other people would. So I'll leave that up to everyone else. It was also considered at one point to narrow the PvP mode down to only 8 jobs, but as they correctly expected, people want to play their job in PvP. You narrow it down to 8, probably not going to be that popular. Team has been able to give jobs very distinct abilities with their limit breaks, some that would otherwise be hard to fit in an MMO, such as the Dragoon going invincible for a while with their jump limit break. Listen, I don't think it would be impossible to do in PvE. I bet a bunch of Dragoons wish it was in PvE, but I'm glad you did it because it's been a lot of fun. Now, moving on to Ultimate, Yoshida praised the skill of Raider since the new Ultimate is even harder than UCOB. For the next Ultimate, it may be hard for the team to keep making this level of difficulty. Yeah, I've spoken with a lot of people about this. I think we've seen this already with the previous Ultimates, but when something like this comes out, I feel like it's worth repeating. Every Ultimate will not be harder than the last. I think that as the game goes forward in time, we will see something stronger than, or more difficult than, Dragon Song Surprise. I think that's a reasonable expectation as the player base continues to learn, get better, and take on these challenges that the team keeps developing. But it's unreasonable to suspect they'll all be harder than the last. That was especially true of Ultima. T, definitely, in a different league, but a lot of people, as Yoshi-P has even pointed out, still considered UCOB to be the hardest one. So it's an interesting topic, but saying, just being up front, you know, they're not all going to be these massive slugfests. Now, on to the actual design. Mr. Ozma, aka Nakagawa-san, it was his idea for the story to be such an important part, and honestly nailed it, because that was one of my favorite parts about Dragon Song Ultimate. This was his idea from the very start. There are already ideas for the next Ultimate, and this is going to blow your mind, after 6.3. So that statement says two things. One, yes, they are still planning another Ultimate for 6.3. There's yet to be mention of potentially holding it back till 6.5. I won't be surprised if they do, given the level of stress that Dragon Song Reprise put and the amount of time commitment required. So they may be concerned about slight burnout going Savage Ultimate, Savage Ultimate, Savage, but they have not indicated that yet. They are currently still planning the next Ultimate for patch 6.3. But the teams are discussing whether to calm things down for the time being, since making it with so much story each time might be hard. In other words, you know, Yukab and Uwu, yeah, they tell a story, but would you really say they are story driven? No, they just kind of exaggerate the story we already have, and people who have played through those stories recognize that. Whereas Dragon Song literally tries to tell you a story, then changes the story, then presents you a whole different story. It is such an integral mechanic into the entire thing. They just don't want to do that. They probably do something much more simple, something that's a little less stressful to develop around. And that could be true of 6.3, the Ultimates beyond 6.3. He says it's something the team is discussing currently, but I'm just glad to hear them still saying next Ultimate in 6.3, because that's what they told us, and I just want to know that that's what they're going to do. Also, just a quick little note at the end, the devs are going to experiment with implementing adventure plates into other content. They've told us this before, starting with 4-man dungeons. So they specifically say they don't want to interfere or interrupt with players' experiences. And that's important, because right now when you load into a dungeon, it doesn't take you to a start screen that is unskippable with your entire team's adventure plate. And they probably want to maintain that. So what wouldn't surprise me is if the adventure plates are incorporated in some other way. Something that is visual on the screen, something that the player can choose to interact with or is encouraged to interact with, but is not demanded to interact with. We'll see how that pans out, because again, I don't think they want to make it so that maybe they'll make it just so you can skip the opening section should you desire, maybe add another option in the menus that say skip adventure plate pop-up or something. I don't know, but either way, yeah, I actually do want to see it in more content, so I'm glad they're already looking into it. But that covers the entire interview that Yoshi-P did with Gamer. Again, source in the description. Go give them clicks, likes, karma, whatever it is you got to do. Anyway, I decided to record this at 20 after 10 p.m. and I'm getting tired, so I am going to go relax. Thanks everyone for watching. Be sure to stay tuned for everything Final Fantasy XIV news, guides. Well, you know the drill. Anyway, thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Until then, take care.